Welcome to the moment they assumed time itself would do their work for them. Welcome to December, the month they whispered about like an ending, like a quiet eraser, like the season that would drain your momentum and make you disappear without confrontation. They really believed this was when you would fade. They thought exhaustion would catch up to you. They thought silence would weigh heavier now. They thought pressure plus time would finally do what resistance never could. And that's where they miscalculated. Because December didn't weaken you, it revealed you. While they expected you to slow down, something else happened. You got quieter, not emptier, but sharper. More deliberate, more grounded. You didn't rush to prove continuity. You didn't announce survival. You didn't scramble to reassure anyone watching. You stayed steady. And steadiness in a month like this is disruptive. December has a way of stripping things down. Distractions thin out. Noise loses its edge. Pretenses get harder to maintain. People feel exposed by time alone with their own thoughts. And while others were managing appearances, you were managing alignment. That difference mattered. They thought December would finish you because they assumed your strength came from momentum. From external energy, from constant motion. They thought slowing seasons break people like you. They didn't realize you weren't powered by speed. You were powered by integration. As the environment grew heavier, you didn't collapse under it. You settled into it. You moved with the weight instead of fighting it. And the more you did, the more obvious it became that what they mistook for fragility was actually containment. You weren't losing energy, you were concentrating it. That's when the exposure started, not loudly, not publicly, subtly. People began noticing contradictions, the ones who talked about resilience but panicked in quiet moments, the ones who preached control but couldn't handle stillness, the ones who assumed you'd unravel because deep down they knew they would. December didn't expose you. It exposed who relied on seasons to do their dirty work. You felt the shift in tone first, the way confidence turned brittle, the way certainty became defensive, the way conversations about you changed, from assumptions to questions, from dismissal to monitoring. They started checking whether you were still standing, and that alone told you everything. Because if December were finishing you, they wouldn't need to look. You didn't announce growth. You didn't rebrand yourself for the season. You didn't dramatize endurance. You let the month pass through you the way winter passes through something rooted, quietly, inevitably, and while they were waiting for signs of decline, they missed something else unfolding. Their own cracks became visible, their impatience, their reliance on momentum they didn't control, their need for outcomes to validate them before the year closed. You had no such urgency. You weren't racing the calendar. You weren't negotiating with time. You weren't afraid of endings. Because you weren't ending, you were settling deeper. December has a way of forcing truth to the surface. The distractions fall away, the noise thins, and what's left either holds or it doesn't. You held without resistance, without dramatics, without explanation. That's what exposed them. They expected emotional leakage, frustration, doubt, fatigue. Instead, they saw restraint, timing, silence that didn't collapse into withdrawal, presence that didn't beg for reassurance. They didn't know how to read that because they were projecting their own limits onto you. They thought the quiet would swallow you, but the quiet became your territory. They thought isolation would shrink you, but isolation refined you. They thought reduced attention would weaken you, but reduced noise clarified you. December stripped away excess, and what remained was undeniable. You noticed how the narrative flipped without announcement. How people stopped saying, wait until December, and started saying nothing at all. How the certainty they once carried couldn't survive contact with your consistency. You didn't defeat anyone, you outlasted illusions. That's the part no one likes to admit. Exposure rarely comes from confrontation. It comes from contrast, from watching someone move through conditions that would break others. Without changing who they are, you didn't harden. You didn't perform resilience. You didn't weaponize endurance. You simply stayed aligned. And alignment doesn't crack under seasonal pressure. Now December is almost done, or already settling into its final stretch, and the silence around you feels different. Not neglect, awareness. The kind that watches without knowing what to say anymore. They thought this month would close your chapter. Instead, it closed their assumptions, and this is only the beginning of part one. Because what December revealed doesn't disappear when the calendar turns. Exposure doesn't reset with a new month. What was seen stays seen. They didn't lose because you attacked. They were exposed because you didn't break. And the quiet truth settling in now is heavier than anything they expected. If December couldn't finish you, nothing they were counting on ever will. What they didn't anticipate was how time would flip the pressure back onto them. They assumed December would work quietly in their favor, that the weight of the season would drain you, slow you down, make your edges softer in a way that looked like decline. They counted on distraction, on fatigue, on the idea that people grow fragile when the year starts closing in on itself. But time doesn't just exhaust people, it reveals structure, and December is merciless about it. As the days shortened, you didn't rush to compensate. You didn't overproduce. You didn't scramble to stay visible. You didn't chase reassurance. You let the rhythm change, and that alone made you stand out. Because while others were reacting to the calendar, you were responding to yourself. That's when the imbalance became impossible to ignore. They were speeding up while you were slowing down. They were talking more while you were saying less. They were signaling urgency while you stayed deliberate. And urgency always exposes itself when it meets someone who doesn't share it. You noticed how conversations started looping, the same concerns repeated with different words, the same anxieties disguised as plans. People trying to outrun the feeling that the year was slipping through their fingers. Meanwhile, you weren't trying to save anything. You weren't clinging to momentum. You weren't afraid of the quiet. That calm didn't look passive anymore. It looked anchored. December pulled distractions away like loose threads. What people relied on for identity, noise, movement, reaction, started thinning out. And when that happened, their internal state became visible. Some grew restless, some became defensive, some tried to reassert control through volume. You did none of that. You stayed consistent, and consistency in a thinning environment feels louder than any performance. They started noticing details they'd ignored before. How you didn't rush to close loops, how you let things remain unfinished without anxiety, how you didn't treat the end of the year like a deadline for becoming something. You weren't trying to finish strong, you were letting things settle honestly. That unsettled them. Because most people treat December like a judgment, a final tally, a month that decides whether the year was a success or a failure, and anyone who isn't frantic in December forces others to confront why they are. You weren't avoiding reflection, you were past panic. That's when the exposure deepened. They realized their expectations about you had been built on projection. They assumed you ran on the same fuel they did, recognition, momentum, external validation. They assumed the seasonal slowdown would cut your supply. But you weren't supply dependent. You were self-sustaining. That's why nothing collapsed when attention dipped. That's why silence didn't turn into isolation. That's why pressure didn't escalate into self. Doubt December didn't strip you down to nothing. It stripped you down to what mattered, and what mattered held. You could feel the shift in how people referenced you, not directly, indirectly, in the way your name stopped being used as a prediction and started being used as a question. Not wait until December, but how are they still moving like that? Not dismissal, reassessment. Reassessment always follows exposure. Because December doesn't just test endurance, it tests authenticity. It forces people to confront whether what they've been carrying is real or just loud, whether their identity can survive stillness, whether their confidence holds when outcomes pause. Yours did, and that contrast grew sharper every week. They expected you to lose clarity as the year closed. Instead, you gained it. With fewer distractions, your decisions became cleaner, your boundaries clearer, your timing more exact. You weren't reacting to the season, you were using it. Not strategically, naturally. You let the quiet sharpen you instead of dull you. That's what exposed the difference between coping and alignment. Others were coping with December, managing moods, fighting fatigue, performing optimism. You were aligned with it, letting it compress your focus instead of draining it. And alignment always looks unfair to people still negotiating with circumstances. They thought December would finish you because they misunderstood your foundation. They thought you were built on output. You were built on coherence. They thought you needed momentum. You needed truth. They thought slowing down meant weakness. You understood it as precision. That misunderstanding became obvious as the month progressed. Their energy frayed, yours consolidated. Their narratives grew louder. Yours grew quieter and more undeniable. You didn't need to prove anything this month. You let the month prove something for you. It revealed who relied on conditions being favorable. It revealed who needed noise to feel powerful. It revealed who panicked when time stopped cooperating. And by contrast, it revealed you, not as someone invincible, as someone rooted. Rooted people don't collapse in winter. They conserve. They deepen. They prepare without announcing preparation. And when others are busy managing appearances, rooted people are doing internal work that doesn't show up until later. December is where that work becomes visible. They didn't see a breakdown, they saw composure. They didn't see retreat, they saw restraint. They didn't see an ending, they saw continuity. And continuity is threatening to anyone who was waiting for your chapter to close on its own. They assumed time would do their job for them. But time doesn't pick sides. It exposes foundations. And the longer December went on, the clearer it became, the pressure they expected to crush. You had nowhere to land. It slid off. It reflected back. It showed them exactly what they were projecting. That realization sat heavy. Because once you realize someone isn't affected by the conditions you rely on, you have to question your own stability. You have to ask whether you're built for stillness or just motion, whether your confidence is internal or seasonal. December asked those questions brutally. You answered without words, by moving deliberately, by not changing who you were just because the calendar did. They thought December would finish you. Instead, it finished the illusion that you were fragile. And illusions, once exposed by time, don't come back with the new year. They linger as doubt, as hesitation, as the quiet understanding that whatever you're carrying isn't dependent on momentum, attention, or favorable seasons. It's integrated, and December made that impossible to deny. And when December finally loosened its grip, the exposure didn't disappear with it. That's the part they didn't plan for. They thought the month was the event, the test, the pressure chamber. They assumed that once the calendar turned, everything would reset. Attention would shift, narratives would refresh, and whatever hadn't broken would quietly blend back into normal. But exposure doesn't reset. It settles, because December didn't just observe you under pressure. It showed everyone else what they look like when the noise dies down. And once people see themselves clearly in stillness, they can't unsee it. You walk into the aftermath without fanfare. No announcement. No victory lap. No, I told you so. And that's what makes the shift permanent. You don't carry December like a scar. You carry it like proof, not for others, but for yourself. Proof that your stability isn't seasonal. Proof that your clarity doesn't depend on momentum. Proof that you don't need favorable conditions to remain intact. They feel that difference immediately. Not because you changed, but because they did. Conversations around you are more careful now, not guarded, considerate. People measure their words, they pause more often. They don't assume the same things they used to, because the version of you they were waiting to collapse never arrived. And when an expectation fails repeatedly, it doesn't just dissolve, it flips. They start wondering what else they were wrong about. December exposed a quiet hierarchy no one wanted to name. The difference between people who endure conditions and people who require them. The difference between those who run on alignment and those who run on momentum. The difference between resilience that's internal and resilience that's performative. You didn't lecture anyone about that. You embodied it. That embodiment carries forward. You notice how pressure no longer approaches you the same way. It doesn't lean in confidently anymore. It hesitates, tests gently, as if the world itself learned something about where your center is, not untouchable, just not easily destabilized, and that realization humbles people, because destabilization is how most influence works. People push to see what moves, they apply pressure to find cracks. They rely on reactions to calibrate power. But December proved something inconvenient. Pressure doesn't always reveal weakness. Sometimes it reveals who was projecting. You didn't outlast December by force. You outlasted it by being honest with yourself, honest about your limits, honest about your pace, honest about what you no longer needed to chase. And honesty like that reorganizes life quietly. You didn't finish the year trying to win. You finished it trying to be aligned, and alignment doesn't spike or crash. It compounds, slowly, invisibly. Until one day, everyone realizes they've been measuring the wrong things. That realization sits heavy now. They can't talk about you the way they used to. The old jokes don't land. The old predictions sound hollow. The old confidence doesn't hold. December stripped those habits of credibility, not because you confronted them, because you withstood them. You also feel something settle inside yourself, not pride, not triumph, clarity, a deeper trust in your own timing, a confirmation that you don't need to rush to prove continuity. That silence doesn't erase you. That winter doesn't end you. You understand now that some people are built for cycles, and some are built for roots. You're rooted. Rooted people don't fear winter. They use it. They grow downward when growth upward slows. They strengthen unseen systems, while others panic over surface. Level movement, and when the season shifts, rooted people don't need to restart. They simply continue. That's what December exposed most clearly. Not that you're immune to pressure, but that pressure doesn't define you. It doesn't rush you. It doesn't rewrite your identity. It doesn't finish your story. And the people who are counting on that now have to sit with the discomfort of being wrong, not loudly, quietly, in the way they hesitate before making assumptions again, in the way they check themselves when predicting your limits, in the way they stop using time as a weapon, because they've seen it fail. You didn't survive December. You used it to refine, used it to simplify, used it to shed what wasn't essential. And now, as the year turns, you don't step forward lighter, because things got easier. You step forward clearer because you know what holds when things get hard. That knowledge doesn't make you aggressive. It makes you calm. It makes you patient. It makes you dangerous only to illusions. They thought December would finish you because they misunderstood what you're built on. They mistook quiet for weakness, stillness for stagnation, slowing down for losing ground. December corrected that misunderstanding, not with drama, With contrast, you didn't need the month to validate you. The month validated itself through you. And that's the final truth they're left with. Now, if a season designed to exhaust people couldn't break your rhythm, if the quiet couldn't erase you, if pressure couldn't rush you into collapse, then whatever they were waiting for was never coming. They didn't lose because you fought. They were exposed because you didn't bend. And exposure doesn't fade when the calendar changes. It becomes memory. It becomes caution. It becomes the quiet understanding that you're not someone time can be used against. You move forward now without urgency, without explanation, without carrying their expectations with you. December did its work, not on you, but around you. And the world feels different because of it. Not louder, not softer, clearer. Because once time reveals who you are, it can never be used to doubt you again.